and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the 2020 GIS Day event virtually at UGA. So today is the GIS on campus panel session. So we are going to discuss GIS happening here on campus and opportunities for students to get involved. So before we begin, I just wanted to remind everyone to use proper Zoom etiquette and to have your mic muted during the panel session, and there will be an opportunity for audience to have Q&A with our panelists at the end. So here today, we have some very special guests who are involved with GIS on campus. So we have Mr. Jimmy Nolan with Carl Vinson Institute of Government. We have Ms. Meagan Duever with the Map and Government Information Library, and we have Dr. Jerry Shannon with the Community Mapping Lab in the Department of Geography. So just to get started today, we are going to start with some introductions. So if each of you guys could take 2 minutes to briefly introduce yourself, and we're going to begin with Mr. Nolan.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Nolan, and I work with the Information Technology Outreach Services Division of the Carl Vinson Institute of Government. My primary function is to work with local governments on a variety of GIS projects that would be cities and counties, and I'm also involved in some state agency projects that involve local data. My work is basically helping these cities and counties develop data, maintain data, training, advising them on how to best organize their GIS efforts within the city or the county. There's a lot of projects that they come to me and they're not sure exactly how to implement, and I work with them on helping resolve problems. My background is I came into GIS through real estate appraisal. So it was kind of a different approach to getting into this technology, but it all ties together very well in local governments. We help them with everything from tax parcel mapping to 911 road centerline updates, addressing projects, routing of service delivery routing, land use planning, water and sewer utilities, stormwater utilities, and pretty much anything else that they throw out at us. So.
Perfect, thank you. So next, we're going to have an introduction from Ms. Duever.
I'm Meagan, and I am the GIS librarian. I'm usually in the main library on campus, in the Map and Government Information library within the library, in the sub-basement, which is the floor below the basement. But we have windows, so it's okay. I've been here for 5 years, and I help kind of what Jimmy does with county governments. I kind of help students make their own maps, kind of help them out when they run into a problem. I also do mapping projects within the library. I've done a few for special collections in the last couple of years. I'll stop there.
All right, and then if we have Dr. Shannon.
Sure. So my name's Jerry Shannon. I am part of the geography department. I also have an appointment in financial planning, housing, and consumer economics here at UGA. I've been here since 2013. I do a number of different things that involve GIS. Obviously the geography department has a lot going on. My corner of it is particularly thinking about community engaged research. So somewhat similar to what Jimmy and Meagan have said. So far, a little bit different flavor in this case. So a lot of the work that I do is through the community mapping lab. So I work with students who are doing Curo research as undergraduates, or both graduate and undergraduate students in the community GIS course. We partner with various groups in Athens and in other local communities around participatory planning, I'm particularly interested in and have done projects with food accessibility, looking at housing and gentrification. A lot of the work that we do involves citizen science kinds of approaches, so doing field data collection that involves different members of the community. Also really interested and teach with open source technologies pretty consistently as well. So I'll stop there as well, because I'm sure there's more chance to say other things.
Okay, perfect. Well, we'll get right into our first question for today. So we're going to start with, how did you get inspired to pursue a career in GIS? And we're going to begin this question with Ms. Duever.
Well, there's two parts. Do you want the real, like, I mean, it's after 5, right? Yeah. So I declared a major in geography, or when I first declared a major in geography, in which concentration of classes, I was told that GIS is for the best students, with the insinuation that I was not one of them. So I took all the classes while I was officially, I'm an environment and resource management concentration, but there's enough electives to fill it all with GIS courses. So I did, and then I put that in my back pocket, and I worked not in GIS for like 14 years. I worked in horticulture, so I can talk to you about plants. Trees, I'm a little less, not as good on, but all the plants, until I became allergic to my job. And as I was looking through of like, okay, what's my next? What am I going to do now? Where am I going to go with this? Searching through jobs, I found that a GIS librarian was actually a thing, which it was not a thing when I took classes. So that became, okay, how do I do this? So that's how I ended up, I guess, of, well, let's this degree I have in geography, let's put this to use, and how can I best do that based on what I liked about working with plants. I like helping people, I like information, I like knowing things, but I don't like selling anybody anything. So I'll stop.
Thank you. And next, we'll move on to Dr. Shannon.
Well, like many folks in geography, I started very much in other fields. So I think that I started as an English major once upon a time, got certified to teach high school English and taught first year writing for a long time, and decided to go back to grad school in geography because I was interested in food systems in cities. And I thought at the time I would end up doing largely qualitative research, doing lots of interviewing and focus groups and things like that. But I knew that geography was a discipline that had a really wide range of methods. And in I think my first semester as a full-time PhD student, I took the Intro to GIS class that everybody has taken who does GIS at some point or another, and really kind of fell in love with it. And by the third year of my program, while I was aware that there's lots of good work to be done with qualitative methods, I was also aware that a lot of folks weren't really thinking critically about GIS and mapping in food systems, and that there's a space there to kind of to try to dive in. So in particular, I was really interested in better understanding, in terms of my dissertation research, the work that I was doing there was thinking about what are the ways that we map food access and what's missed by that. And I really am interested in this idea of trying to think about using GIS to really address critical issues around community planning, community development, food insecurity, housing insecurity. But got really interested in what do those maps miss, and how do we think creatively about other ways to try to ask questions that get at people's everyday lived experiences, and try to get a richer perspective or a more representative perspective of voices that aren't often brought to the table who are historically included. So all the work that we do in Community Mapping Lab is trying to do that kind of mapping, thinking creatively about what voices are missing from this conversation, and how can we use mapping to try to amplify some of those experiences and perspectives.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Mr. Nolan.
Well, I guess what inspired me to get involved with GIS was back in 1993, I guess it was. I was working in I was in charge of the tax assessor's office in Morgan County, Madison, Georgia. And we were doing a lot of paper mapping of tax parcels and road center lines and soil productivity and different things that were related to valuing property. And I heard about this technology called GIS, and I said, I think this is going to allow me to do a better job of what I'm trying to accomplish here and make my life a lot easier. So we started working, integrating tax assessment records with digital maps, and we had the first parcel viewer website in the state in 1996. And that caught the attention of the Georgia Department of Revenue, which they reached out to me and hired me for a few years. I'd worked real closely with the Carl Vinson Institute of Government and my regional commission while I was learning this technology. And I got an offer from UGA to come here. So I've been working with GIS for a little over 25 years, I guess, 26 years. And what inspires me with my job now is teaching other people how to integrate their systems, build an enterprise within the county so that people aren't duplicating each other's work, and teaching them how to do their jobs better and teaching them how to make their lives easier. And I guess that's what inspires me, is having somebody say thank you so much when I leave their county, and you just made my life so much easier, that kind of thing. And I enjoy working with some students as well, because I have interactions with a lot of students that are doing projects that need the data that I have. And by the way, we have parcel data and the tax assessment records for 157 of the 159 counties. So, and that's available for any student, any faculty member, any staff member. As long as you don't share it with the general public, you have access to it.
Wow, thank you. All right, well, that's some great information. So our next question that we have today is, could you describe a moment in your career where GIS was vital to your success? And we will start this question with Dr. Shannon.
This is a tough one. This is one that was not quite ready for. I would say, let me think about that one for a second. I mean, I think I use GIS quite a bit. I would say that certainly, I mean, early on, one of the first kind of pieces of analysis that I did was looking at how people use SNAP benefits. And so there's a lot of the work on food access is very much focused on where stores are. And I think that one of the things that we've become increasingly aware of is that takes out of the equation the ways that people navigate different kinds of food environments and the kinds of agency that they exercise and where and how they want to shop. And so it took me a while to wrangle this, but I managed to get data from, in this case, the state of Minnesota and from the federal government about where people received and redeemed food stamp benefits or SNAP benefits, and had to figure out how to aggregate that. So there was all sorts of questions of zoning and, at what scale do we look at these data, but ended up with a map that really powerfully showed places where kind of there's a net outflow and inflow of SNAP dollars that I think painted a really striking picture of even in places where there are supermarkets that people were choosing to go elsewhere to shop because of other factors that were going on. And I think that would have been really impossible to do without GIS. I think the other thing I would point out, a really recent example is the community GIS, and I'll say this really briefly, community GIS class I taught last spring. We worked with former residents of the Linnentown neighborhood close to campus. and did some digitizing of historical records there, and have ended up being able to create some maps of the neighborhood as it existed prior to its demolition to create student housing over on Baxter Street. And I think one of the things that GIS does there is help make visible or help render something that used to be there and is not there anymore, but it brings it into the present in a way that can be really powerful, both for the folks who were living in those places, but also for others who are learning about it, that it makes it real in a way that stories can do that as well, but GIS does that in a particular way that I think people find useful and powerful.
That's really cool. Just thinking about ways it could help the community. I really like that. And so next we'll have Mr. Nolan.
Describe an experience where GIS was vital to success. Well, one thing that comes to mind is we had a community that in Pulaski County, and they had passed a special local option sales tax to build, to raise money to build new fire stations. They felt like they were not getting the coverage that they needed around the county, and they had collected all this money, and now we're ready to break ground on fire stations, but where do we build them? So we looked at data that they had available for existing fire stations and took their road centerline network and calculated a 5-mile drive distance, which the insurance companies recognize as being the, I guess, acceptable distance from a fire station. Anything beyond that, you pay a higher homeowner's insurance rate. So they were trying to lower the insurance rates for these citizens that were outside that drive time area. Now, it's easy enough to pick a point and do a buffer of 5 miles, but that doesn't tell you anything about drive time, really, when you have roads that are not emanating straight from that point that you're buffering. So we came up with an analysis, figured out where their gaps were. We started looking at their tax parcel data. And this is why I say GIS was critical, because we looked at which parcels were not being protected by place and where to place these new fire stations, and see which parcels were left not being covered. Well, as it turns out, they had a small gap in a couple of places. They had a prison that was not covered within that 5-mile drive distance, but it turns out the prison had their own fire station. So that ruled that area. That said, okay, we don't need to build a fire station there. We found a few other areas, but there were only 1 or 2 houses in those areas. And we looked at some areas around the perimeter of the county and said, okay, we've got a gap in coverage here and a gap in coverage there. Let's enter reciprocal agreements with the adjoining counties. We'll help them as backup, and they can help us as backup. So that saved the taxpayers in that county hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars over a period of time on their homeowners insurance. That was something that we could not have done without GIS. I mean, like I said, it's easy enough to create a 5-mile buffer, but we wanted to know 5 miles by road, not as the 5 miles as the crow flies. And there again, that's something that I don't really know a good way to do that without GIS. So that was one experience that GIS was critical in being able to do the work.
Wow, yeah, that's another amazing example of GIS helping the community. Thank you. And we'll move on to Miss Duever.
Yeah, I'm totally gonna ruin all that, like doing for others, good times. I'm really sorry.
You do no good, Meagan. That's just, you know.
I'm gonna talk about my success. Because really, I mean, helping other people, it's really their success and their projects and helping them through. For me though, I went back to, I went to library school starting in like 2007. You might be, pardon my cat here. You might be familiar with the economy crashing in 2008. Well, I was in Michigan at the time, and it started earlier in Michigan. So I just upped and moved to Wisconsin, as one does, right? And so when I finished library school, I could have graduated in 2009. I stuck around till 2010 just because no one was hiring, especially in libraries. They're one of the last, they don't always get their funding back right away. Or is there, there was a lot of hiring freezes in 2008, 2009, 2010. So really, 2011, I stuck around. I got a GIS certificate. I boned up on my GIS because I was either going to get a job in a library or I was going to get a job doing GIS. And so they paid the same. Starting salary was about the same. I'm like, we're doubling down. But I was really running out of options, cash wise. So as I'm churning out application upon application, the ones that I really heard back from in library land were the ones that had a GIS or geography bend to them, where they were looking for someone that could do GIS to help their patrons. So being in a field that's not GIS, knowing GIS and being able to discuss GIS, that's really how it was vital. It was really that I landed a job and then parlayed that one into the job that I have now. So, and where I get to help everybody, there's the helping everyone, right, piece to it, but that's it.
Just piggyback 15 seconds on top of what Meagan said. There's been so many situations where just being the person who knows how to map stuff is like a vital skill that's deeply appreciated. And I think just having even kind of the basic GIS skills oftentimes will get you a job or get you an interview or get you involved in a project.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's going to be super inspiring to students who are looking to specialize in GIS, that it's going to open some doors for them in the future. So that's great. So our next question is going to be, what recommendations can you give to students beginning their journey with GIS? And for this question, we're going to start with Mr. Nolan.
Wow, that's a good question. I would say start with the basics. Learn how to edit data, learn how to join and relate databases, learn how to create thematic maps, just basic mapping stuff. I've come across a lot of people that have had formal education in GIS, but they seem to be, I don't know, in a lot of cases that they seem to be missing out on some of the more basic stuff and looking at the higher level stuff. I want to be an analyst. I want to be an application developer. I want to be whatever. But stay humble at first, I guess, is my advice.
And next we'll have Miss Duever.
I would say don't be afraid to fail and just to burn it all down and start again. Because sometimes you have to do that. Like our map doesn't crash nearly as much as it used to in the good old days starting out, where you would have to do your assignments 2 and 3 times to actually get to the end because it would crash so often. But it's that repetition of like, why am I doing this? How does this build, from one piece to the next? How do all these pieces play together? That I think it's doing it several times to really cement that. And definitely the more GIS classes I've taken, the more it's like, the light bulb moments of like, oh, that's why this works. Oh, that's why I'm doing this, or how these build together, or the sequence of events. But I think, to know your data, don't be afraid of your data. Don't be afraid to try something, and it might not work. And that's okay. That's how we learn. Yeah, just don't be afraid to burn it all down and start again.
Awesome. And next we'll have Dr. Shannon.
Those are all great points. Just to kind of reiterate those in a different way. So there's a woman who just got her PhD over at Kentucky, Amber Boss, who gave a talk called Map It Anyway. And that's basically, I believe that's what it was. And it's kind of what Meagan was saying about, it doesn't matter if it's a bad map, like if it's worth doing, it's worth mapping, right? If you've got questions that are interesting, you can get caught up in all the perfectionistic things, but to really think, feel like making a bad map about a good topic, and even, what does a bad map mean? But it's worth doing and kind of putting yourself out there. And don't be afraid of that. Be willing to kind of take risks and do stuff. One other thing that I think is really important is that it can be tempting a lot of times to take GIS courses or do GIS training and feel like basically you're just learning how to use a piece of software. So you learn where the buttons are in ArcGIS. And I'd really encourage students, even from early on, to think, as has been said, conceptually about what am I doing here? Beyond just kind of punching this button, what does this function do? And be able to think conceptually about what you're trying to do with the data set, aside from whatever specific command you're trying to run. So that might mean like sketching out a workflow or something like that, because there are so many pieces of GIS software out there that do very similar things, but they might call them something different. And if you start getting the mindset of, I want to do something that's like, I want to take attribute from one thing and move it to another thing, what's the way I can do it here versus here versus here? Then you start having a broader range of tools that are at your disposal, and you can think really creatively about how to do it in a few different ways, depending on whatever tool you have at hand, whatever piece of software you have at hand. The last thing I'll say is to really be aware of metadata and documentation. So when you're getting data, where did that data come from? Who put it together? What kind of gaps might be present in the data? Being aware of that. But then even more so, as you're doing analysis, take notes. What decisions are you making? What criteria are you using? What observations might you be including or taking out of this data set, and why? So that the you that's 6 months later will know those things, or the person who gets the data or gets that analysis when you're done will know those things, and you've got it written down somewhere, because it can be really hard to track otherwise. And so just to be really careful and take the time to document your process, I think, is really important.
Thank you. So much amazing advice for students today. Thank you, guys. So our next question is going to be, what can students on campus do to get more involved in GIS? And I know you already started on this a little bit, Mr. Nolan, but we're going to start with you.
Okay, well, first of all, you need to understand that I'm in public service and outreach. So most of my work is done off campus. My interaction with students is usually somebody comes to me where a professor has said, hey, go talk to him. He's got the data that you need. And it's more of a one-on-one kind of thing. I would say start looking for summer internships when you're not taking classes. I know that we use a lot of student labor at ITOS, Information Technology Outreach Services. And it's grunt work, quite frankly. It's like I said with the last question, if you get used to doing the basic stuff, then you start getting a better understanding of the more advanced stuff. So, for example, if I've got data that has problems in it, and I'm trying to run a process and I keep running into issues, maybe it's not what I'm doing. Maybe it's the source of the data that I'm trying to use. I'm a firm believer in paying your dues. I'm a musician, and I didn't learn to play right off the bat. I had to start out slow and go, and it's hard. You work at it and you keep going. So the more things that you can do, part-time jobs, a lot of these counties and cities will hire interns for the summer, and seek out those kinds of things. And most of them, are going to pay you something. Maybe it's not what you're worth, but it's something, and you're gaining experience. So that would be the best advice I could give.
Perfect, thank you. And Ms. Duever?
I would second that. Definitely the internships. Yeah, there's usually county, city government looking for interns. Um, I've I've known when I lived in Kansas, I was part of the Kansas Association of Mappers, which is a great group of people, and it's a lot of city and county and state government people. And yeah, we talk about like, you know, they'd have people apply, and a lot didn't have any real world experience at all, of just playing with or just using that type of data and putting in their time, because I mean that's really it's really necessary. So yes, I'll just second everything that Jimmy just said.
Great. And I do see some questions in the chat. I will make a note of these questions and make sure I include them in the Q&A at the end. And next, we'll finish up with this question with Dr. Shannon.
I mean, I think getting a breadth of experience too. So, you know, in geography, we've got advanced courses more on the kind of vector analytical side. We've got a lot of good remote sensing coursework and expertise as well. And I think taking advantage of both of those, so you have a sense of the range of things that you can do with GIS, because again, out in the real world, you're not sure exactly what your specialization will be. There might be one thing that you really like doing, but I think that can be important. And I would second the getting the real world experience. You know, one of the things I think that was helpful for me when I was in grad school was just thinking about, you know, how could some of the things I was learning be useful for organizations or groups I was a part of. What are finding some excuses to try to apply some of the things I'm learning, and then having to hit your head against the wall and swear, which is an essential part of the GIS process. Right? Throwing the computer across the room is sometimes really important, and that's how you grow as a person and as a GIS user. So I think, you know, I think those things are important, and trying to be involved with that. One other thing I would say is like find communities that are online. So, you know, academic Twitter has lots of good GIS folks. There's a GIS chat group that you can be a part of and see how other people are making use of GIS or what kinds of things they're doing. I've learned a whole lot about geospatial analysis and some of the tools that are available through that. Right now, if you're on Twitter, there's an ongoing thing called 30 Days of Mapping, where people are posting on a different theme every day, and you can see some really interesting projects that people do and get all sorts of ideas that way. And I think that can be really inspirational as well, as you continue to grow as a GIS user.
Awesome, thank you. And so for our next question, what book or website do you reference the most in doing your GIS work or homework? And so to start this one, we're going to actually begin with Miss Duever.
So usually it's probably like GIS Stack Exchange or Stack Exchange, or what the Esri help files, because usually what I need to, it's something isn't working for me, and I want to know if it's me or if it's how other people have they found this problem and how have they fixed it. So I think that's mostly, I think, the websites that I hit up most often.
All right, and Dr. Shannon?
Yeah, I'd say Stack Overflow, you know, generally tends to be the thing. Sometimes that can be tricky. So when I first started getting going with R, and I had really basic R user questions, Stack Overflow was not the place to go, because it was somebody who'd been using R for 5 years and had a very specific, very technical question. So thankfully, there are some books now that are more startup. So in the R universe, for instance, R for Data Science, Hadley Wickham's book, I think that's the title, or Data Science with R, is a really good resource. And there's a number of kind of O'Reilly published, but also available online books that are helpful that way. I also use YouTube videos, because a lot of people have posted YouTube videos of how to do specific things sometimes, and that can be really helpful. I'll sometimes use, you know, published articles or use books. That's often for more kind of advanced statistical work. where you want to see somebody really kind of talk through a process and talk through an analysis and why they did it the way that they did it. But I really feel like for day-to-day stuff, a lot of it's just Googling, and you'll find threads on things like Stack Overflow that walk you through whatever problem you've got. And the professionals do that. Like the people, your professors do that, right? It's important to note that.
And Mr. Nolan.
Well, I mean, I think I've already kind of talked a little bit about how diverse some of the things that that I work with can be. So, you know, there are a lot of recommendations I make for websites and resources, I guess is a better way to put that. You know, the NOAA website, I get a lot of questions from local governments about imagery and elevation data, and some of the elevation data that's available there, refer a lot of people to that. They also have a program where they contract with local governments to acquire imagery, so that, you know, the person that's at the local government level doesn't really have to know a lot about the latest sensor technology and a lot of the technical terms. They can go there and contract with another government agency. They don't have to put it out for bid in the private sector, and they don't have to know how to write the RFP and how to go over the proposals. And so that's one that I refer people to a lot. And the various clearinghouses for different data, soil data, data that's on the Georgia GIS clearinghouse. That's a website that I refer a lot of people to, even though some of that data is, you know, pretty dated at this point. But there's a book, and it's got a horrible title, but it's called How to Lie with Maps. I'm not even sure if it's in print anymore, but that was a very interesting book. I've referred a lot of people to that book, and it goes into the psychology of using different colors in your maps, and that's an interesting read. So, you know, I don't know what the practical use of that is, but it's kind of entertaining, actually.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. And so the next question that I have for you guys today is, what's the topic of the last GIS presentation you gave for work or school? And then I have some follow-up questions with this. And how did that presentation go? How did you prepare for it? And what would you have changed looking back? And I'll add this to the chat for everybody. And to begin this one, we'll start with Dr. Shannon.
Sure. So probably this is an odd question to ask in COVID times. I would say that, so the last presentation that I did was on Lindentown, which I've talked about a little bit already. And so I'll talk about the one that I did, the second to last presentation, which was at the geography meeting, the virtual geography meeting last spring, which was on the growth of dollar stores nationally. And so I'd done some analysis around where and how dollar stores have grown in cities and how that interacts with patterns of racial segregation. That was a, well, so how the presentation went, I think it was fine. It was virtual, you know, it was a pre-recorded video, so it was a little surreal, as all these things are these days, but I felt like it was useful to get some feedback and see people's reaction to it, but I think overall it went fine. It was a project that took a long time, and I think this is, again, coming back to this idea of like deal with messy data. Also realized that this was a project that probably took over a year to really conceptualize well. So I knew I was interested in thinking about how and where dollar stores were growing, but how to do that, what that meant in terms of a research design took a while to figure out. And it was a lot of kind of playing around, if I look at it this way or this way or this way. And you end up spending, you know, 80% of the work that you do doesn't end up in the final presentation or the final result, but it needed to happen in order to get to where you ended up at the end, right? And so a lot of the times you can have that kind of, you know, what you might think of as kind of wasted effort, but it's really essential in terms of the bigger project that you're working on. Looking back on it, I mean, that's a video that I wish I'd done a little bit better job on, because dollar stores are really popular, but it was in the middle of all the shutdown stuff, and we didn't have the time to like do a super polished presentation. So going back, I probably would have done it in a little more organized way, but the way these go sometimes.
Yeah, I just realized that question might be a little bit out of taste during the current circumstances. And next we'll go with Ms. Duever.
So the last presentation was in the before times. So that was the Western Association of Map Libraries in Reno. And that was on the work that I've done with the Digital Humanities Lab and a project that we did with a history class that was a collaborative data is a collaborative data gathering from of different historical newspapers, and then we cleaned the data up for them and then showed them how to use GIS to map this data. And so I just kind of reported on, like, you know, what the outcomes were, why we were why we made the choices that we did. And so, well, can I count this as my presentation? I'd like to redo this answer, please. I wasn't prepared. But yeah, that was my last presentation. And normally, I guess, of what I would have changed. Normally, I've given a different version of that presentation around the same topic in England the year before that. But that's usually with Dr. Meagan, who's the digital humanities coordinator. And so it's much better when she talks about her section and I talk about the mapping part. Yeah, we play to our strengths. So I will say, you know, in academia, you get to go to some fun and exciting places.
Perfect. And Mr. Nolan.
Well, Jerry, let me first say that you and I should talk offline sometime about a conversation that I had with a guy that was a regional manager for Walmart and their take on what's going on with the dollar store explosion. But that's another day. The last presentation, you know, I've been racking my brain. When was the last presentation? I think it was a joint meeting of city and county managers. So these are people that are, you know, they're not techies. They're usually pretty sharp individuals that can grasp what you're talking about, but they're not GIS people. They're not the people in the trenches that are actually doing the work. They're the ones that are recommending to the city council or the county commissioners, yeah, we should spend the money on this project because it's a good idea. What I did to prepare for that, well, I'm usually addressing one audience or another, and cities and counties have very different needs. So putting the two areas of interest together in one presentation was, you know, that was what I did to prepare for this project. And if I could have changed anything, I would have had a longer period of time for questions, because there were a lot of questions at the end of the presentation. And I'll end it there.
Thank you. So I have one final question for you guys, and then we're going to jump into the question and answer session with the audience today. But my final question is, what can you tell us about open source? How do you feel about it? Have you used it? How and why? And we'll start this question with Ms. Duever.
That was a lot of pieces there. So open source, I've used QGIS a lot more in the last 2-3 years. And there's definitely, I think, more people. Thank you. More people using it, more people being comfortable with using it, more people that have a familiarity, or they're more comfortable with code, with using open source. There are a lot more open source tools. but yeah, I use both QGIS and ArcMap. I would highly recommend being able, to use both. There's definitely some things that you can do in one a lot easier than you can do in the other. Um, and so like this pandemic, I teach a 1 credit class for GIS for humanists, and this year we made the switch over to QGIS just because the social distancing and keeping, having people have the option of being off campus. So that's definitely a lot of people have Macs and don't really want to partition a hard drive. And so QGIS is great for that. So yay, thumbs up, open source.
All right. And Mr. Nolan?
Well, I'm definitely seeing an uptick in interest in open source applications at the local government level. I've seen a few counties that have started using QGIS, and I've worked with one county that used something called Manifold. In all the cases that I've seen, I'm talking about seasoned GIS users. I'm not talking about somebody that, works in the planning department that is just being introduced to GIS. My thoughts on it are, if you are comfortable with the learning curve, I guess is the issue, then by all means, it's a good option. I can tell you now that the people I've talked with at Esri are concerned about it. So that's a big issue with them. The downside of it is if somebody calls me on my cell phone while I'm driving down the road and they're having a problem with an Esri product, then I can usually talk them through it without, a computer in front of me. I don't think I could do that with QGIS. I would be like, well, let me take a look at it and I could probably solve their problem, but it's not as widespread. So there's not as many resources, I guess, is the best way to put it. And I guess that's pretty much what my thoughts on it is. If you feel comfortable, then go for it. But otherwise, if you're not don't have a solid foundation, then stick with the application that has the most support until you gain that experience. So you see, I deal with a lot of people that are getting into GIS from some other arena. They didn't study geography. Maybe they studied business or something, and they've got a job as the the county administrator or whatever. So something out of the package is generally going to be easier for them to use.
And Dr. Shannon?
So I'll play the other side of that. So I use a lot of open source tools in my teaching. I'd say that the benefits of, if we're going to talk about GIS, we're obviously mostly talking about Esri in terms of the non-open source world. And I think the downside of that is I work with a lot of collaborators who don't necessarily have access to, say, the site license that Franklin has here at UGA, and getting access to the software itself and just dealing with licensing with Esri becomes its own special form of headache at times. And so the thing I like about QGIS is, similar to what Meagan said, like you download it, you install it. Doesn't matter if you've got a PC or a Mac. You're not going to have to worry about the license expiring a year after you get it if you've got a student license, things like that. I will say that, when I use Esri products, which I do, I'm doing something on Survey 123 right now. It's because you can get up and running in some situations. Story map is another example, fairly quickly. It can be pretty user friendly. There's times when Esri feels really arcane and kind of we're building on 1980s technology as well, in ways that some of the open source tools don't. So QGIS, I actually feel like, has a more modern interface. It works better with more varieties of data. So things like KML work way better in QGIS, the Google format, than it does in ARC, just as one example of that. I think it's better integrated with some of the stuff that's available online. And I think, there is, I think, a growing interest in open source tools. So, I mean, I just made a list. QGIS, R, Python, Leaflet for web mapping. I use a fair amount. So you can create a web map with Leaflet and then host it on GitHub and have it available online. And I think it looks just as good as anything ARC creates. It has a little more elbow grease put into it. For data collection in the field, Open Data Kit can work really well. And that's an open source tool. And I think investing in those kinds of common resources is helpful because then we're creating a set of tools that you don't have to pay a company thousands of dollars to use. And I think it opens up the realm of who's going to be able to have access to that software. The documentation is not going to be as good. It's going to be buggier. There's going to be these weird gaps. There's downsides to it, but I think there's lots of reasons why investing in knowing that technology and contributing to it can be really valuable for the broader field, the broader discipline.
Thank you so much, you guys. That's amazing advice for students who are interested in GIS. That concludes our panel session. And so we're going to move into our Q&A with the audience. And so we do have one question from an audience member. They wanted to know, what would you recommend to a student who has found a serious interest in their academic career, who doesn't have work experience, but wants to find a GIS related job after graduation? And for this one, you guys can, I can call on all three of you guys, or if you guys just wanted to whoever feels compelled to answer, either way.
Well, I would say start networking, get involved with Georgia URISA, getting involved, I mean, depending on which discipline you're going into, I mean, the ASPRS, there are organizations out there that are made up of people that are in the business, and just get to know these people. Sometimes it's just as much who you know as it is what you know. So it's a good way to get your name out.
Yeah, there's often local GIS users groups. I know Atlanta has one that's worth doing, thinking about, even tools like LinkedIn and people who are graduates from UGA who have gone on and gotten jobs related to using GIS somewhere, and doing kind of cold call interviews with them about what's been useful for them, and networking that way can be helpful. And finding ways that you can get even more experience, even if it's kind of entry level, or work it into a job that you've got that, will help. You're always building onto the skill set that you have. I think is useful.
I don't really have anything different to add to that. So,
the other thing I would say is, there are, so like, I forget I can't give you the list of, but like the data camps of the world, Esri has a set of training videos. There's ways to get proficiency with some of the main tools that you can do outside of being in school. And so spending time kind of walking through those can be really valuable as well.
I have a question for Mr. Nolan. What are some popular data requests? In other words, what are some data that we can ask for from Carl Vinson?
Oh, wow. If you haven't taken a look at the Georgia GIS Clearinghouse, that's housed in our office. I mentioned earlier that I have parcel data, and we have data services set up to share that data with you. And like I said, it's available. The agreement we have with the counties on the parcel data is we'll share it with other government agencies, universities, students, staff, and faculty, but it can't be distributed to the general public because they charge for that data if a developer comes in and wants to buy the data. So some of the popular data requests, I get a lot of questions about land cover data, and I get a lot of questions about LiDAR. I get a lot of questions about soil data. I get a lot of questions about, oh wow, I get a lot of questions about data from other jurisdictions. So County A says I'd like to get data from you know, another county that's similar in some sort of makeup to my county for some sort of analysis. And a lot of times they'll call me and say, do you know the guy in such and such county? I've never been there, you know. So those are probably the most popular ones, I guess. I would say I would probably put LiDAR #1 on the list. I don't know if y'all are aware, there's a huge LiDAR acquisition project. It's a multi-year project that I think they're going to wrap up next year. And we'll have LiDAR for the whole state. If the funding, you know, there are a lot of ifs when you're talking about federal funding, but most of this is being paid for by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Geological Survey. So when I say it'll be wrapped up, that means it'll be acquired. That doesn't mean it's going to necessarily be available. It goes through a rigorous QC process, and there's a lot of other things that go on before the data makes it to the general public. But that's the #1, LiDAR.
I'll say that's a project for like the whole US, so it's not just Georgia. So if you want LiDAR, it's coming.
For the whole country?
Oh yeah, this
And
has been a multi-year
wow.
process, because some of the western states were earlier on the list, and so now it's moving over here. I think we're one of the last ones, but yeah, the whole country in LiDAR.
The Georgia was we weren't the first ones to get in line on the acquisition for the nation, but we moved up on the list pretty quickly because we were able to get Georgia DNR and Natural Resources Conservation Service and USGS together, and we applied for a grant that we got simply because we were working, multi-agencies working together, just the coordination aspect of it.
We have a question here for Ms. Duever. So you mentioned you taught a GIS class. Does the map library provide resources for students seeking to learn more, or resources that we could take advantage of?
So we have a small lab in the sub basement, and then there's also the digital humanities lab has like 10 workstations, I believe. That was probably the pre-time, so it's probably 5 now with everything being socially distanced. But then there's also we have a small set of books, you know, a lot of design and cartography type books, but then also some of the both Q, R, and ArcMap books on our little shelf. We don't have any data that, you know, you can't get somewhere else as of yet, but we're slowly working on that. Slowly. Yeah, I don't know what other resources you have in mind.
Well, we are approaching the end. Oh, actually, we have one more question.
Yes, historical imagery. We have lots of air photos. We have more air photos than of the state of Georgia than anywhere outside of the National Archives. And so we have just finished scanning all of the indexes for that imagery. So you can find that on our website, and then we only have maybe a quarter of all of our photos scanned, but we have a lot of air photos. And I don't have an ETA on when that could possibly, we're kind of evaluating what projects to focus on next.
Do we have any final questions for our panelists today? Give it a minute. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been amazing doing this session with you guys, and I'm sure everybody has gotten so much in terms of how they can learn more about GIS on campus. Yeah, and thanks for logging in, everybody. And it's been a really, it's been a joy. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Courtney. And I want to mention this is Courtney's first time ever moderating a session, and I think she did a wonderful job. This has been recorded. I just do want to mention that. So we'll post this on YouTube. So if you want to watch this again, you can. And want to thank all of our panelists for being here and all of our guests for joining us. All right, I know we're probably our last thing of the day before dinner. So we'll see you all tomorrow and check out our schedule. Thank you.